Introduction. In December 1972, the world witnessed one of the most baffling and tragic aviation disasters. A routine passenger flight, Eastern Airlines Flight 401, en route from New York to Miami, vanished from the radar not over a vast ocean, but while preparing to land. On board were over 170 souls. The flight, operated by a state-of-the-art Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, seemed the epitome of modern safety and luxury. But the story of Flight 401 is not merely one of a catastrophic crash into the Florida Everglades. It is a story that transcended its own tragedy to become a cornerstone of aviation folklore, primarily due to the persistent, chilling, and well-documented reports of the crew's ghosts appearing on other aircraft. Were these merely the stressed imaginations of a grieving airline? Or did this tragedy create a paranormal echo, a ripple in reality that reached far beyond the swampy grave of the jetliner? Tonight, we descend into one of aviation's most haunting mysteries, the crash of Flight 401 and the spectral shadows it cast across the entire fleet. History: the last flight of the TriStar. On the evening of December 29, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 lifted off from New York's JFK Airport. At its controls was a highly experienced and respected crew, Captain Robert Bob Loft, 55, First Officer Albert Bert Stockstill, 39, and Flight Engineer Donald Don Repo, 51. The mood was professional, the flight, routine. As the wide-body jet began its final approach into Miami International Airport, the crew encountered a seemingly minor issue: the green indicator light for the nose gear failed to illuminate. This could mean the gear was not properly locked down, a critical fault, or, more likely, that a simple $2 light bulb had burned out. Choosing caution, the crew requested to abort the landing and enter a holding pattern to troubleshoot. Captain Loft engaged the autopilot and directed his attention inward with his crew. The giant aircraft leveled off at 2,000 feet, circling above the pitch-black expanse of the Everglades. For several minutes, the three seasoned aviators were engrossed in the puzzle of the faulty light, even attempting to manually verify the gear's position. It was a fatal distraction. Unnoticed by anyone on the flight deck, the autopilot had been inadvertently disconnected. The L-1011 began a gentle, almost imperceptible descent into the darkness. There was no panic, no mayday call. The first officer only noticed the altimeter reading a mere 100 feet seconds before impact. The silence was broken by the sound of the aircraft tearing through swamp and sawgrass. There was no fireball. The Everglades, in a cruel act of mercy, absorbed the impact, but the force was still devastating. Of the 176 people on board, 101 perished, including Captain Loft and Flight Engineer Repo. First Officer Stockstill succumbed to his injuries hours later. The official investigation pointed to a clear, if heartbreaking, cause: human error. The crew, fixated on a minor technical problem, had failed to monitor their flight instruments. But for Eastern Airlines, the tragedy was only the beginning. Mysteries and the phantom manifestations. In the months following the crash, an unsettling narrative began to circulate among Eastern Airlines employees. It started as whispers in crew lounges, then grew into formal, if hushed, reports. The apparitions: crew members on other L-1011 TriStars began reporting encounters with spectral figures. Most commonly seen were the likenesses of Captain Loft and Flight Engineer Repo. They were described not as frightening, but as solemn, sometimes concerned figures. Captain Loft was often spotted in first-class seats, while Don Repo was seen near the engineering panels or galley areas. The warnings: the phenomena went beyond mere sightings. In one famous account, a flight attendant preparing a service cart was approached by a man in an Eastern Airlines uniform who identified himself as an engineer. He told her there was a problem with an oven. When maintenance was called, a critical electrical fault was found in that very oven, a fault that could have caused a fire. The flight attendant later identified the man from a photo. It was Don Repo. The salvaged parts, the key to these hauntings, many believed, lay in a grim corporate decision. In an effort to cut costs, Eastern Airlines had salvaged usable parts from the wreckage of Flight 401 and installed them into other L-1011s in its fleet. The sightings of the ghosts were overwhelmingly reported on aircraft that contained these cannibalized components. It was as if the souls of Loft and Repo had hitched a ride on the very machinery they died with. The corporate silence, Eastern Airlines management, already reeling from the financial and public relations disaster of the crash, moved swiftly to suppress the stories. Employees who spoke publicly about the phantoms faced reprimands or dismissal. An official memo was even circulated, forbidding discussion of the subject. This heavy-handed response only fueled speculation that the company was hiding something. The story refused to die. In 1976, author John G. Fuller published the book, The Ghost of Flight 401, which compiled dozens of testimonies from pilots, flight engineers, and stewards. The book became a bestseller and was later adapted into a television film, cementing the legend in popular culture. Theories and conspiracies. The persistent reports of the Phantom crew have spawned several explanations, ranging from the psychological to the paranormal. Theory 1, collective hysteria and stress. Skeptics propose that the airline was an organization in trauma. The crash was a profound shock, and employees were working under immense stress. In this environment, grief, guilt, and fear could have manifested as shared hallucinations, a form of mass psychogenic phenomenon where people see what they expect or fear to see. Theory 2, the supernatural attachment. Proponents of the paranormal believe that the violent and sudden deaths of Loft and Repo created a powerful psychic imprint. Their spirits, bound by a sense of duty or unfinished business, became attached to the physical remnants of their aircraft. They weren't malevolent, but guardians, using their posthumous presence to prevent future disasters on the planes that carried pieces of their own tomb. Theory 3, corporate misdirection. A more cynical theory suggests the ghost stories were a convenient, if macabre, smokescreen. What if the cause of the crash was more complex than simple pilot error? Perhaps there was a deeper, systemic flaw in the L-1011's design or in Eastern Airlines' maintenance protocols. Allowing, or even subtly encouraging, a supernatural narrative could have distracted public and regulatory scrutiny from more damning, tangible failures. Theory 4, the energy imprint hypothesis. A quasi-scientific theory posits that traumatic events can leave a recording on the environment or objects, a sort of psychic residue that can replay under certain conditions. The salvaged parts, steeped in the intense energy of the crash, became vessels for this imprint, projecting the images of the crew in their final moments of focused concern.